Unless you've been living under a rock for the past 9 years, you've surely heard of Subnautica, a survival horror game set underwater. If you know anything about games, then you know that underwater sections are awful. I still get PTSD from Sonic drowning. But Unknown Worlds pretty much overcame the impossible and made one of the best indie games, and also one of the best horror games. You see, in the first half of the 2010s, the horror genre was becoming less and less popular. People just got used to jump scares and gore. But many indie developers saw an opportunity to revitalise the horror genre with a twist. If we look at the most popular horror games, then you've got Resident Evil, which has zombies and punching boulders, Silent Hill 2 is full of fog, and Fear is, well, the clue's in the name. Oh, and it also kind of starts the trope of a creepy child in video games. A similarity between all these titles is the jump scare. The Cambridge Dictionary definition of a jump scare is something that shocks and frightens you so that you suddenly move or jump. They're a staple in the horror industry, but at some point you begin to get desensitized by them and you can start to expect them. However, when the horror game starts to target your mind, they become 100 times scarier. When you experience a jump scare or a cinematic shock, the typical reaction is to be startled and scared by it. It triggers your fight or flight response, but the effects are usually short term, as the shock activates your amygdala, which then tells the hypothalamus to release adrenaline. This replaces the fear. However, when you're deeper than where even the brightest of lights can't reach, and the ambient sounds start to play, and the tension builds and builds and builds, and you're waiting for some kind of scare to justify your fear, but nothing. No jump scare, only paranoia. This is only one example of psychological horror being effective, but it can be as simple as just crawling through a tight space, being in a room full of bugs, or just plain eye contact. In the murky waters of the dunes, you can be met with 8 Reaper Leviathans. The biome borders some essential places such as the Mushroom Forest and the Blood Kelp Zone, so even when you think you're safe, surrounded by mushroom trees, swim a few meters too far and you'll be met with a blood-curdling roar. What's even scarier is that the safe shallows actually borders the dunes, which reinforces the hostility of the game even more. Even after around 50 hours of gameplay, the dunes and mountains are still too scary for me. I'm fine with Ghost Leviathans, and I don't find the Sea Dragon scary, but something about the Reaper Leviathan terrifies me. It terrified me so much that between 2018 and 2022, I never actually beat Subnautica. I couldn't find any more Cyclops engine parts in the Aurora or the Mushroom Islands, so I was stuck on 2 out of 3. Although last year I learned that the underwater islands also had them. I felt motivated to play again, so I built my Cyclops, played through the game like normal, and finally left planet 4546b on my own save file. I love Subnautica, but sometimes I imagine what my experience with the game would have been like if I went in blind. When I came back to it, I basically knew the whole game and map, so it didn't feel scary. But imagine what I would have felt like looking at the underwater islands, not seeing the bottom. I traversed deeper and deeper, reaching 500 meters, but nothing. Only bone sharks. Subnautica isn't a game designed for jump scares. Only the Reaper Leviathan is capable of intentional ones. This means that they're very scarce, so when they do happen, they're much more impactful. Instead, the game relies on the absolute paranoia caused by the fear of the unknown. H.P. Lovecraft once said, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown." This is evident through his stories of eldritch abominations, which influenced the fishing game, Dredge. In the game, there are plenty of leviathans in the water which attack you, but you can only flee. It only released a few months ago, but it has already sold over 1 million copies, and following the recent Unity drama, it is now subject to be charged 20 cents for every installation next year, but that's besides the point. At first it seems like a standard fishing simulation game, however as you progress you begin to notice that not everything is what it seems. When it's late you can be followed by a night angler and your panic increases. That's weird. Also now some of the fish you catch appear to be mutated and corrupted. That's even weirder. Then the fishmonger tries some of it and almost goes insane. The people in this game are not normal. The lack of a conclusion for the fishmonger's story drives us mad until eventually we become just as deranged as the old mare. At the end of the game, we get a choice to perform the ritual or take the book for ourselves. In the normal ending, we perform the ritual and we are greeted by the deity, a Lovecraftian horror which dooms the greater marrow. Although in the true ending, we break the mirror, revealing we were the collector all along, and we travel back to sea to be relieved of the curse. Dredge is not the scariest of games, but it excels at being unsettling. Cosmic horror was written to emphasize the horrors of the unknown and the incomprehensible, and this short fishing game is designed to break your sanity through seemingly monotonous tasks with the obsession over relics. Both Subnautica and Dredge really stand out when it comes to worlds where you don't really belong. Despite being different genres, they're both great at that fear of the unknown element, because you don't always know what's lurking beneath the water. Although what if we look past the horrors in our brains and face the horrors of our hearts? Doki Doki Literature Club. Where do I even begin? This game has so much in just 4 hours of gameplay, and I guess I'll start with the best girl, Yuri. She's very mature and intelligent, but initially she comes off shy. Although as you get to know her, you learn that she can be aggressive and quite insensitive, but this is due to her social ineptitude. Ironically, Yuri likes horror and surrealism, which may foreshadow the dark turn the game takes. After Sayori's death, the game fully embraces the psychological horror genre, as Monika becomes much more manipulative and messes with the other girl's files. There's some stuff that I might not even be able to show, because YouTube won't like it. Bear in mind DDLC came out in September of 2017, and just after PewDiePie said the N-word, so YouTube was in pieces at this time. Anyway, in Act 2, Yuri is much more obsessive over the protagonist, and we learn that she self-harms. At first it's due to her low self-esteem, but in Act 2 she most likely does it for the pleasure, as she doesn't really understand her emotions. You see, just like with drugs, you can form an addiction to self-harm, as it provides some sort of short-term relief, and this ultimately became her hamasha. After the 3 poems are written on day 4, Yuri will stare directly at you with realistic eyes. I feel like I'm losing my mind. What is happening to me? Yuri becomes so obsessed with you that when you two are alone, she forcefully confesses her love, and no matter what you say, she stabs herself 3 times. You are left with her lifeless body for an uncomfortable few minutes, a full in-game weekend. You watch her blood darken and her eyes lose colour, and you are left wondering, what could have happened if things went differently? Although what's strange is that before this, she actually recognises that something is wrong and Monika is the cause, so she states, "I don't care if Monika's listening." Monika's the mastermind behind all of the events in the game. She's sentient, and to some people that loss of the 4th wall, a barrier of protection, can already create unease. If you're some kind of psychopath who replayed DDLC after all that, then you start to notice that Monika drops some subtle hints about her control. You kind of left her hanging this morning, you know? In your first run, you might have glossed over this text, because as you rush to Sayori's room, seeing her lifeless hanging body, the shock takes away your rationality. The answers are in plain sight, but we only realise once it's too late. Being fearful over a lack of control is painfully evident in the dating sim, to the extent that even the worst character, Natsuki, notices that something isn't right with Yuri. On the 4th day, she doesn't even write a poem, it's a plea for help. I just feel so helpless. She's angry at herself because she can't help Yuri. She's scared that she can't save Yuri, and so she places that burden onto you. Pause. I've talked about Yuri, Sayori, and Natsuki, but I haven't given Monika enough attention. She's the most important piece to this puzzle, yet I've only said a few things about her. After all, she's the definition of the fear of a loss of control. The cause of all the events in the game are because of Monika's jealousy, sadness, and desperation. She amplifies Sayori's depression, she amplifies Yuri's obsessiveness, and she amplifies Natsuki's harshness in order to make them less likable, so the MC prefers to be with her. This backfires because the girls confess their love anyway, but it doesn't matter because they will always die. She feels trapped in a fake world, and she knows that she's not fully in control. Monika knows that she has a creator, even stating, "Sometimes I feel like I'm not in control," and it's kind of scary, in some unused text. I think the feeling of being controlled is one of the worst and incomprehensible beliefs to people. We desperately try to justify our freedom, but there is always someone else with power over you. It's terrifying. The existence of free will influences our motivations, desires, and our whole life, so being trapped in this room can be scary. However, almost poetically, the tables turn and Monika is deleted from the game. Doki Doki Literature Club is not a game for the faint-hearted, obviously, and it even reached the Manchester Evening News over concerns of it being unsuitable to the emotionally vulnerable. However, I believe it's one of the best psychological horror games out there. The themes in the game happen in the real world, and strangely, the way it tugs at your heartstrings makes you much more immersed. It lures you in with the promise of a dating sim, and then destroys you mentally with the death of the girls you love so much. I don't think there'll be another game like DDLC, and I don't think Dan Salvato's next game will ever have as big of a mark as Doki Doki had on the internet, but honestly, I'd love to be proven wrong. Deltarune. In that game, your choices don't matter, and this is prevalent in Chapter 2 with the Snowgrove route. In this route, you control Noelle Holiday into fighting enemies in the pursuit of getting stronger, but when you leave the Dark World, you can tell that this route has deeply affected Noelle. You see, when you check up on her with her dad, he wants to go in the game, and she shouts in desperation, "No, I'll control it myself." There's that word again. Control. Noelle is desperate to make her own choices, just like how Monica desperately wants to be in a world of infinite choices with you. Unlike Monica, Noelle suffers from forced helplessness. Usually forced helplessness is developed from trauma, and a common example is a family member in the hospital, or who has died. And look at Noelle, her dad's in the hospital and her sister has disappeared. To make it any more obvious, she's very shy and doesn't really make her own decisions, which is why when you let her join your party, a switch inside her has flipped. Feeling helpless is scary, but when you learn that your choices do in fact matter, wouldn't you want to cling on to that feeling as much as possible and feel powerful? Besides, it's good to get stronger, isn't it? This is a turning point in the game. You force Noelle to kill an innocent shopkeeper, and she tries to deny her actions by exclaiming, "They must have given it to us." The theory of denial as a coping mechanism was seriously researched by Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund Freud. Yes, the same guy who thought of the Oedipus complex, but basically, Freud's theory stated that denial is a defense mechanism used when a person is faced with an uncomfortable truth, so instead they reject it despite the overwhelming evidence stating otherwise. And this is what Noelle is doing. She knows she attacked and killed the shopkeeper, but she chooses to believe it was gifted. Furthermore, when you guys exit the Dark World, Noelle wakes up and believes it was just a dream, but deep down, she knows it wasn't. After all, she's not stupid. Noelle is probably the only one to notice that Chris is acting differently. Yet again, she tries to cope with it by reinstating it was just a dream. But then why did Chris's voice sound so terrifying? I've only talked about Deltarune briefly here, but I recommend these two videos which talks about what I said in much more detail. More importantly, cheers to everyone who's actually watched this far. Subscribe for a table, you earned it. You guys are the real ones, and I actually have a confession to make. I never bought DDLC Plus. By the time it came out, the game had completely left my mind. Although I can't lie, I only really want it for the box art. Look how goated it is. Also, look at how much stuff is in the box. Anyway, thank you for 100 subs and for blowing up my previous video. At the time of writing the script, I'm on 115 and I'm so grateful. Seriously, thank you and I'll see you later.